So what I'm going to share with you today is an exchange of ideas. It is about being equal. I'll be coming back with a load of things after today. And I thank you so much for your help. So I came into post, and EVOC's the equivalent of TSI Murray, except we have 3 organisations in Edinburgh in a partnership, Edinburgh Social Enterprise Network and Voluntary Edinburgh. But when I came into post 3 years ago, I thought, you know, God, this is a rich city, Edinburgh. How could we leverage in some of the resources that we don't normally get access to? And I'd been around some years ago at the beginning of something called the Essex Community Foundation that led to people, for example, putting legacies or other types of things into a resource for the community of Essex, which is a big place from the east end of London to the coast. It's a big area. You've got urban right the way through to big rural areas. And I was curious about that. And then, maybe just popping on to the next slide, Leah Black, who I'd worked with closely during COVID, who's chief executive of one of the organisations in this wee circle in the middle out in Wester Hales, wrote a blog where she was really angry. And she was really angry about losing health and social care money. And she wrote a blog on Medium saying, how the hell am I supposed to address poverty when you've just taken my grant away? How can I plan for 10 years? I thought, I'm not developing any fund. I'm going to get Leah in to do that. So Leah is the person who leads on the project, and she's got a really vital meeting in terms of the funding today. But I hope what I can share is also the context, as well as some of the design work around the fund, and link it to some of the things that I've heard this morning. So it's okay, we're going to go back one slide with us. Just stay on the pink one for a minute, and thanks for all your help. So both Leah and I were part of 2 networks when we were in post before COVID, which were in southwest Edinburgh, that had really come out of a GP, a Northern Irish GP who went off to Alaska, and they couldn't spend money in this bit of Alaska on health because people were so healthy. And one of the reasons was social connection. So Peter came back and influenced the setting up of a network called the Living Well Network in Wester Hales. So for those who don't know Wester Hales, it's usually very well known because of things like train spotting, but it's area of some of still the deepest poverty in Scotland. And what Peter and other local activists did was to pull together the Living Well Network, where they were able to consult with local people. And it's wonderful to see your plan today for the area. This is a micro community. Everything's walking distance from each other, the arts centre, the GP centre, etc. And it's had investment in it from the millennium, really. A lot of activism in it. Things like the origin of Scottish Community Alliance was somebody who's, Jill's here in the room. We've got the person running that for the past number of decades was an activist there as well. And but this ability to bring people together around the one table and have a common set of priorities. So Leah was in this group, and I was down the road in something called Joining the Dots, which is ironic considering the title of the conference today. And we regarded these networks as super important because at the heart of them was the communities. Then there was the organisations around that. About Youth is a tiny youth agency working in just literally a couple of high-rise. Somebody who'd been made redundant when some very bad procurement decisions were made by big bodies like Health and Social Care. He was so angry, he'd set up About Youth. The Community Trust, which was really tiny. There was no community council. That had folded. SCORE Scotland, really interesting BME-led organisation. So people met physically, often regularly, with the GP, and around that outer bit is who was there. We've deliberately left some question marks in because that allows people to go, there's more, and if somebody's missing, it's okay. We acknowledge there was always more people coming in and out. A community link worker, the Department of Work and Pensions, a school teacher, a head teacher might come as well and be more connected to what was going on in their communities. So a GP didn't know that meditation was on Wednesday or Thursday. They just needed to know who their reliable organisations were that they were working with. And really, it's like a mini version of community planning because you've got your city council, there's somebody there connected to that. You've got health and social care. You've got the big things, the big anchor institutions, if you like, of the out around the edge. But this was at a local level. So Leah was really embedded in this, and it really activated during COVID as a network, as did mine. So we'd started COVID meeting at 8 a.m. in the mornings, every morning, because we didn't know quite, like the Icelanders, how many of us were going to die. So, but I think our husbands both thought we were having affairs, but we really clearly weren't. We were just trying to work out, what are we going to do tomorrow? And then we'd meet again at 8 a.m. the following morning. So a very close relationship built up about our networks. And then when we got money in from the Scottish Government, we did it together. And we said, no, these 3 places, because we also worked with Gorgon Dalray, are going to work together collaboratively. The money's going to go here, and then we're going to find all the wee things. So some of these things were awfully wee that were part of that network. So while EVOC's 150 years old, how do we cope in the 21st century environment? So moving on to the next page. Edinburgh is a really changed city as well. It's going to grow by a quarter in the next 10 years. It's extremely diverse. 17% are people of colour, and especially out on the edge where property is affordable, or where people might have been placed as a result of coming from Ukraine, or somebody who's arrived from as a result of refugee and asylum status, but equally workers who are coming into the care sectors. It's affordable property out on the edge of Edinburgh. It's a very changed city. So 17% are communities of colour. But meanwhile, you've also got areas of deep poverty that never turned the dial, like Wester Hailes. So in spite of all this effort, we've not turned the dial on poverty. I wonder whether or not what would be going on if we hadn't been doing all the effort. Anyway, it would be worse. I think the community is really, really vital. So, okay, to move on to the next slide, Jill, thank you so much. EVOC was part of a process as a third sector interface for calling for something to be done about poverty and a commission on poverty. There was a piece of work done called Mind the Crack, which was interviews with 1,000 voices across the city. And that was one of the things that I'm always really interested in. What are the conditions upstream that then create things? So what are the conditions that created the Poverty Commission? Well, some of the conditions were these severe areas of poverty that we just weren't getting to. But it was picked up by the City Council, and they created a commission, which was chaired by Jim McCormick, who's now Chief Executive of the Robertson Trust. And at the time, he was in Joseph Rowntree. So I'm going to have a sip. I'll have a sip while you read this, because this is a really key statement in the poverty report. Now, Jim worked with one of the council staff to take the commissioners to every corner of Edinburgh. So they would come and they came to the place I was running at the time, which was Broomhouse Space and Broomhouse Hub, and talk to youth workers and families. The commissioners included people with lived experience, but also people with really good interesting expertise in housing, and a whole range of things. And it has now been embedded, a Just Capital report, and the outcomes of that into the Chamber of Commerce business plan for Edinburgh. There are many different things. But I think it's most at risk at the moment, actually, in terms of as we face some of the financial challenges. But I'll come on to that in a bit. But it was an incredibly aspirational report, just launched after COVID, one of the first in the UK. As I said, it was before the role that I'm in now. So, but this was also the source of Leah's anger and some of mine as well, which was, how on earth are we going to achieve some of this? So going on to the next slide. Thanks so much. How could we really, address the root causes of poverty and racism, but also look at restoring the natural world, and actually have people with experience of that and different types of movements at a local level, grassroots organisations, influencing even the design of the fund. So we were really lucky to get some investment at the beginning. I was thinking about somebody's question earlier about seed investment, and we were very lucky to get a few sort of things came together. A little bit of money from the City Council, a little bit from William Grant Foundation, and people who were also asking the same questions. And I think that's what's really interesting. Lots of people are asking the same questions. So even if it can't influence all of the funding on the planet, or in Scotland, or in this bit of Scotland, or in Edinburgh, what we committed to was to have it open source, that we would talk about it as we went along. We would talk about it to our different funders we were working with, so at least one could begin to shift the dial, and particularly to actually share it with people here in Scotland and across the UK.